Story 1, The Vent. I still can't sleep in rooms with ceiling vents. It's been 3 years, but the sound of the central air kicking on makes my palms sweaty. If you have a vent right over your bed, you might want to check the screws tonight, just to be sure. It started when I moved into this cheap studio apartment just off campus. It was one of those older brick buildings that always smells a little like damp dust and burnt coffee. My unit, 3B, was small, but the rent was too good to pass up for a broke college student. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, a sweaty guy who constantly wiped his forehead with a rag, said the last guy left in a hurry to move back home. That should have been my first red flag. The main feature of the main room was this massive, rusted metal vent grate right in the ceiling. Because of how small the apartment was, my bed had to go directly underneath it. For the first week it was fine, just standard old building noises, pipes clanking, neighbors walking heavily upstairs. But then I started noticing things when the city grew quiet around 2 a.m. At first it was just scratching, like fingernails tapping rhythmically on sheet metal. I told myself it was rats or squirrels in the ductwork, disgusting but normal city stuff. I banged on the ceiling with a broom handle and the noise stopped. I felt tough, problem solved. 2 nights later I woke up dead cold. The heating was off. The room was silent except for a sound coming from straight above my face. It wasn't scratching anymore, it was breathing. It was slow, wet, shallow breathing. I froze under my blanket, staring up into the black slats of the vent. It sounded too heavy to be an animal. It sounded human. I laid there for an hour, terrified to move, until the sun started coming up and the breathing faded away. The next day, I felt like I was losing my mind. I grabbed a flashlight and stood on a chair to examine the thing. The screws holding the grate were painted over with dozens of layers of cheap landlord beige. It looked like it hadn't been opened in 50 years. I shone the light up into the blackness. It just went straight up for a foot and then curved out of sight. But the smell hit me then. It wasn't dead rat. It smelled like old sweat, unwashed hair, and something metallic like copper pins. I bought industrial-strength earplugs that afternoon. That night, I popped them in and actually managed to drift off. I don't know what woke me up, maybe a vibration. I pulled an earplug out, groggy and confused. The apartment was dead silent. Then, from right above me, a voice whispered. It was dry as dead leaves and terrifyingly close. "He's awake." My heart hammered against my ribs. That wasn't a neighbor through thin walls. That was directly in the vent. Before I could process the sheer terror, another voice, deeper this time, whispered back from further up the duct. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I can see his eyes open." I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body went into full adrenaline shock. I rolled off the bed, crashing onto the floor, and scrambled for the lamp. As light flooded the room, I heard a sharp scurrying sound above, like someone crawling backward very fast on hands and knees over metal. I grabbed my keys and ran out of that apartment without even putting on shoes. I pounded on Mr. Henderson's door until he answered, looking furious. I told him there were people in the vents. He looked at me like I was on drugs, but something in my panic made him grab his master keys. We went back up to 3B. Everything was quiet. He grumbled about evicting me for causing a disturbance as he climbed onto my bed to look at the vent. He stopped talking. He put his hand on the grate and pushed. It wasn't screwed in. The screws were just glued heads stuck onto the frame to look secure. The heavy metal grate lifted right up. Mr. Henderson shined his heavy-duty flashlight inside. He gasped and stepped down off the bed so fast he almost fell. He looked pale. "Call the cops," he said, his voice shaking. "Now." The police found it within the hour. The vent didn't connect to the HVAC system at all. It led to a small, walled-off utility void between apartments 3B and 3C that wasn't on the building plans. Inside, they found a filthy sleeping bag, dozens of empty food wrappers, and jars filled with urine. They also found a small hand drill and a photos were of me, sleeping, changing clothes, eating dinner, all taken from a high angle looking down through the vent slats. They never found the two people who had been living up there. They must have had another way out into the hallway ceiling. I moved out that day, leaving half my stuff behind. I don't care about the deposit. I live back with my parents now. It's safer here. But sometimes, when I'm home alone and the house gets quiet, I swear I can hear that dry, raspy breathing coming from the heating register in the floor. Story 2, the scratching wall. If you ever wake up in the middle of the night and hear scratching inside your walls, don't do what I did. Don't investigate it. Don't tap back. Just grab your keys, get out of the house, and never go back inside alone. It started about a month after I moved into the complex. It was one of those generic beige apartment buildings out in the suburbs that caters to single guys with okay jobs. I worked the swing shift at a distribution center, usually getting home around 2 a.m. The place was quiet, cheap, and my landlord, Mr. Henderson, swore the unit next to mine, 3B, had been vacant for 6 months. The first night I heard it, I was just drifting off. My bed was pushed right up against the wall that separated my apartment from the empty one next door. Scritch, scritch, payu, scritch. It was soft, right behind my headboard. I froze. You know that feeling when your whole body just locks up in the dark? I lay there holding my breath, staring at the ceiling. I figured, okay, mice. It's an old building. It's gross but manageable. I bought traps the next day, the snap kind and the sticky kind. I loaded them with peanut butter and shoved them under my bed. 3 days went by. The traps were empty. The peanut butter hadn't even been touched, but the sound had changed. It wasn't the frantic scrabbling of an animal anymore. It was deliberate. It was slower, rhythmic. It sounded exactly like a human fingernail dragging slowly down the drywall from the ceiling to the floor. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd get home exhausted, hit the pillow, and within 20 minutes it would start. I complained to Mr. Henderson. He was a sweaty guy who always looked overloaded. He just waved me off. Jason, it's probably the pipes heating up, or squirrels in the attic. Unit 3B is dead empty. I checked it myself last week. That night, I decided I wasn't crazy. I grabbed a heavy glass from the kitchen and pressed the open end against the bedroom wall, leaning my ear against the bottom. It's an old trick, but it amplifies everything. At first, dead silence. Then I heard it. It wasn't scratching. It was a soft, wet exhale, right on the other side of the plaster. My stomach dropped out. That wasn't a squirrel, that was lungs, big lungs. If you were in my shoes, you probably would have left right then. I should have, but I was angry and terrified and stupidity took over. I pulled my head back and banged my fist on the wall 3 times hard. Thump, thump, thump. I waited. The silence stretched out for 10 seconds. I was just about to convince myself I imagined the breathing when it happened. Right against the glass, tap, tap, tap. I didn't sleep in the bedroom that night. I slept on the living room couch with all the lights on, clutching a baseball bat. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Things in my apartment started feeling off. I'd come home and find my mail stacked neatly when I usually left it in a mess. My toothbrush would be on the left side of the sink instead of the right. Little things, the kind of things that make you think you're just tired. Last night I got off work early. The warehouse system crashed, so I was home by midnight instead of 2 a.m. The apartment complex was dead silent. I walked into my bedroom to change. That's when I noticed it. In the back of my closet, which shares that same wall with 3B, there was a faint dusting of white powder on the floor, drywall dust. I pushed my clothes aside and knelt down. Right at eye level, there was a tiny hole drilled cleanly through the wall. It was barely the size of a BB pellet. My heart was hammering so hard my chest hurt. I knew I shouldn't look. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I leaned in and put my eye to that little hole. I wasn't looking into a dark, empty apartment. I was looking into a lit room, and it was looking back. A watery, bloodshot eye was pressed against the other side of the hole, blinking rapidly. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, yelling something incoherent. From the other side of the wall, there was a massive crash. Not a scratch this time, a slam. The drywall in the closet cracked outward. I don't remember running out. I remember the cold air of the parking lot and the shaking of my hands as I dialed 911. The cops broke down the door to 3B. It was empty. Well, nobody was in it right then. But someone had been living there for a long time. They found a filthy sleeping bag laid out right against the wall where my bed was. They found empty food containers, bottles filled with urine, and a little hand drill. And they found the pictures. One wall of that empty apartment was covered in Polaroids. Hundreds of them. They were all of me. Me sleeping in my bed, taken from a crack in the blinds. Me watching TV, taken from a gap in the patio door. Me sitting at my computer, taken from that little hole in the closet. They never caught whoever it was. The cops think he heard me come home early and slipped out a back window right before I looked in the hole. I moved out immediately. I'm staying on a buddy's couch now. It's safe here, but I can't sleep without noise-canceling headphones. Because when the room gets quiet, I find myself staring at the walls, waiting for that first slow scratch. And the worst part isn't the fear that he'll find me again. It's knowing that for 2 months, the only thing separating me from a monster was half an inch of cheap drywall, and I was sleeping inches away from his face. Story 3, the landlord's key. If you've ever had that nagging feeling that someone has been in your house while you were at work, do not ignore it. I thought I was just being paranoid, maybe just losing my mind from too many double shifts, but it turns out the person with the spare key wasn't the one I should have been afraid of. I moved into a small duplex in a quiet corner of Pennsylvania about 6 months ago. It was one of those old, converted Victorian houses that looked charming but felt a little heavy, if you know what I mean. My landlord, Mr. Peterson, lived in the other half of the house. He was a retired guy, mid-60s, always wearing a faded baseball cap and tinkering with a lawnmower that never seemed to start. He seemed harmless, helpful even. He told me he kept a master key in his kitchen just in case of an emergency, which is pretty standard for a small-town setup. I work as a night shift manager at a local diner, so my schedule is the opposite of the rest of the world. I'd get home at 4 a.m., sleep until noon, and spend my evenings watching TV or scrolling through forums. The weirdness started about 3 weeks in. I'd come home and notice my kitchen window was unlocked. I'm a stickler for locks, especially living on the ground floor, so it bothered me. Then, a few days later, I found a sleeve of crackers on my counter. I don't eat crackers. I definitely didn't buy them. I figured Mr. Peterson had come in to fix the radiator. It had been clanking lately, and maybe he'd just been clumsy or left his snack behind. I mentioned it to him the next morning. He just blinked at me with those watery blue eyes and said he hadn't been in my unit for a week. He actually looked offended that I'd asked. I tried to let it go, but then the gifts started appearing. A single wilted daisy in a glass of water, a pack of cigarettes on my nightstand, even though I don't smoke. The worst was when I woke up one afternoon and found my front door wide open, the deadbolt thrown back, swinging in the breeze. I was terrified. I called the cops, but since nothing was missing and there was no forced entry, they basically told me to change my locks and talk to the landlord. So I bought a hidden camera, one of those cheap ones disguised as a USB wall charger. I plugged it into the outlet facing my bedroom door and went to work that night, my stomach in knots. When I got home at 4:30 a.m., I didn't even take off my coat. I grabbed my laptop and pulled the footage. Around 1:15 a.m., the bedroom door creaked open. A figure walked in. It was Mr. Peterson. He was wearing his usual cap, but his movements were wrong. He was twitchy, dragging one foot slightly. He walked over to my bed, which was empty, obviously, and just stood there. For 20 minutes, he just stared at the empty space where I usually sleep. Then he leaned down and smelled my pillow. I felt like I was going to throw up. I was about to call the police again when the footage showed something that made my blood turn to ice. Peterson suddenly looked toward the bedroom closet. He looked terrified. He started shaking his head, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then a hand reached out from the darkness of my closet. It wasn't Peterson's hand. It was pale, with long, yellowed fingernails. The hand grabbed Peterson by the collar and yanked him toward the closet. Peterson didn't fight. He just went limp. The door shut. 10 minutes later, the closet door opened again and Peterson walked out, but he wasn't twitchy anymore. He walked with a smooth, predatory grace. He exited the room and locked the door behind him. I didn't call the cops. Not yet. I was convinced Peterson was being extorted or something. I grabbed a kitchen knife and went to the closet. It was empty, but when I pushed back my hanging coats, I found that the back panel of the closet had been unscrewed. It led to a narrow, dark crawl space that ran through the center of the house, connecting my unit to Peterson's side. I crawled through. I know it was the stupidest thing I could have done, but the adrenaline was doing the thinking for me. The space was tight, smelling of rot and old paper. I reached a small vent that looked into Peterson's living room. I looked down and saw Mr. Peterson. He was sitting in a chair, but he was tied up with heavy duct tape, his mouth gagged. He was crying, staring at the person sitting on the sofa across from him. The person on the sofa was wearing Mr. Peterson's clothes. He was wearing a mask made of what looked like dried, yellowish skin, and he was holding the master key between his fingers, turning it over and over in the light. Then the person on the sofa looked up, not at the tied-up landlord. He looked straight at the vent where I was hiding. "I knew you'd find the way back, Tyler," a voice rasped. It sounded like two pieces of sandpaper rubbing together. "The landlord was getting boring. He doesn't react like you do." I scrambled backward through that crawl space so fast I tore the skin off my elbows. I didn't stop until I was in my car, flooring it toward the police station. The cops raided the house 20 minutes later. They found Mr. Peterson still alive but traumatized, but the other man was gone. They found his nest in the crawl space between our walls, discarded food, hundreds of photos of me taken through small holes drilled in the drywall, and a collection of keys. Not just my key, not just Peterson's. There were dozens of keys, all labeled with addresses from all over town. The scariest part, the police told me the man wasn't a stranger. His name was Jason, Peterson's son, who had been legally dead for 10 years after a house fire. He'd been living in the bones of that house the whole time, using his father to gain access to the world. I moved 3 states away the next week. I live in a modern apartment now, all glass and steel, no crawl spaces, no old wood. But every night before I go to sleep, I take a piece of Scotch tape and place it over the deadbolt in the frame. Because this morning when I woke up, the tape was broken, and sitting on my kitchen table was a single, wilted daisy.